Live with Verse Take. Here we go,
Live,
episode 10. 10,
count them
10.
10. The year I graduated high school in 2010, so
That's relevant. It's it's the hate 10,
10.
10. I remember when I was 10, I was in the fourth grade. But
Okay,
hey, um, my
that's
name's
a.
Justin.
My name's James.
Your name's James. We make up Verse Take here, and today we're talking about Ezra Pound,
Controversial
which
figure to say the least.
yeah, yeah, and Pound
Great
isn't
poet.
10, it's 16. Just so you know, it's just
Well, a penny in for a penny, in for a pound, as they say.
mm,
So
okay.
you have to be careful with some of these measurements and metaphors.
Yeah, and maybe that relates to Ezra, in some way, because we're breaking with form, with old form. So, because hey, he pretty much, I mean, is he modernism? Is he kind of
he's
one
he's
of
he like
many, but like pivotal?
he's almost like the power behind the throne of modernism. Like if
Yeah,
modernism were a throne, this guy's Rasputin lurking in the shadows.
right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if you want to know why Wasteland is so hard to read, um, you can thank Ezra Pound.
or if you want to get all the allusions to something like the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock,
Hmm.
you can kind of see uh, what these sort of people these poets were going for,
Right.
in
Yeah.
the earlier part of the 1900s.
Hmm. Yeah. Or even, like with William Carlos Williams, direct treatment of the thing. Think
Mm,
of you did the Red Wheelbarrow.
right.
Uh, I remember being in eighth grade, having a teacher read that to me and kind of being like, yeah, okay, I mean,
Right.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, 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 yeah.
But in light of all the poetry that came before it, you can kind of see like, oh, this is almost like Pablo Picasso's
Mm, mm-hmm,
painting in
mm-hmm.
some
Yeah,
ways.
definitely. I did think I kind of thought of Picasso a bit actually. So
Like it's
that's
like,
funny.
can we use language to sort of almost illustrate, to
Hmm.
almost get into the cracks of what we see, the form that we see in front of us.
Hmm. Yeah, both part of the sort of modernist movement and being uh, in Paris. Um, Pound being an American, but largely living abroad during his lifetime.
Right. And this is
Yeah,
kind of starting to be a bit of a trend that we
right.
can kind of see. A lot of the American poets, even the ones featured in the fabled poetry magazine, they're actually over in on the European continent.
Hmm. Yeah, like T.S. Eliot. Even prose writers. Like Fitzgerald and Hemingway. Spending
Right.
and actually Hemingway and Pound had a relationship as well.
Mm.
I listened to a little podcast with their reading letters between the two of them. Hemingway
Okay.
was teaching Ezra Pound how to box, and Ezra Pound was teaching Hemingway how to write. That's kind of
Mm.
how
Okay.
Hemingway described
That's
it.
interesting.
Yeah,
But even people that came a little bit later, like your Robert Frosts,
yeah,
he was in Europe.
right. Who
Um,
was around during the time and actually went to Europe to get his first volume published.
right.
During that time, 1920. So, even though
So it's
he lived much later,
it's a bit odd, the story of American poetry, and its modernist movement. Even though it's American poetry, it actually almost took place in Europe.
right? Yeah,
But
it is interesting. It being modernism breaking with form, and yet the poets went back to almost like you could see traditional roots by going back to Europe. Um,
mm, you could see that.
you know, Going back to sort of to to Europe, to like sort of old intellectual stomping grounds to do something new, to break a new form.
which is interesting though, because there's sort of a traditionalism in that, but the difference between European poetry is, this isn't a poetry of the aristocracy, or
Mm,
in some instances it is poetry of the heroes of the past. The ancient kings and queens are the ancient
hmm
heroes of the past. But in some instance they try to capture, qualities that would be of the common man, or of, some people who are, more common. So I don't know. There's an odd intellectualization we get in modern
yeah.
poetry. There's an
Well, yeah.
intellectualization, but
hmm
also an
hmm
appreciation for those outside the halls of academia.
Well, so like they're striving to capture the language of the everyday person, and music, musicality of it, finding the music in that, and then yet sort of within that framework, um, you, tons of esoteric classical illusions, so
Mm,
where you would have to be, like with the Wasteland, or um, some of these other works, like you'd have to know classical literature, and know like Shakespeare, and know the Bible, and know um, uh, you know mythology, Greek
right.
and Roman mythology.
The
um,
tales of King Arthur.
right, yeah, exactly. So you would have to be like well read,
Right.
um, and even have an understanding of different languages, in order to maybe even fully comprehend this poem, but at the same time you can understand it without, you can glean some understanding from it without knowing those things,
Mm.
and there's almost, there's so many different perspectives of sort of knowing a thing, and it's just kind of interesting that they try to almost bring it to the language of the everyday, but they still, it's still elevated as far as, maybe themes, I mean the language is still elevated in many ways, it's just it's an interesting, sort of, um,
And I think
dynamic.
I think this can be seen as like, you know uh, an even further extension of, the modern era as a whole. The modern
hmm
era, how the self can sort of, or the person is sort of enough to perceive these great spiritual truths, or these sort
yeah.
of esoteric, evaluations. Like one
hmm
person, the individual, can perceive these things, can communicate these things. And so even the common man with the common parlance can almost be elevated, lifted up to sort of these higher positions,
yeah.
these higher realms.
Yeah, it's almost like within the one man, he can contain all of human history, right? And sort of
Right.
ascertain all of human history, and human doings. One man is capable of that, sort of a Superman, of sorts, but it's something, worth striving toward,
Right. An
nonetheless.
ideal.
Right. Yes.
It is almost like, the ideal that kind of, got us to the moon, or the ideal
Right.
that kind of helped us defeat the Nazis.
Yeah. Well, like you think even with modernist architecture, clean lines, think of, the modern era really being brought also with like the medical revolution as well. At the turn of the century, you know, cars and vehicles, like things being streamlined, like or even like streamlining and optimizing ourselves.
Right. So, there's this spring streamlining, optimizing, this optimism.
hmm
This is before the sort of postmodern cynicism really set in. So, so once things kind of go to more postmodern, it's, how there's no architecture that could look good all over the world. There's no sort of one size fits all narrative of how the world works. So the sort of
Right.
postmodern cynicism that is evidenced in, some of the poetry in the later half of the 20th century, kind of pokes holes in some of these grand narratives, if you will, of some of the earlier parts of the 20th century. So, it's
Yeah.
interesting how these ages of knowledge are always sort of contrasted by these ages of romanticism. It's
Hmm.
almost like a back and forth between rationalism and romanticism.
Yeah.
And then there's little micro battles in between the big grand battles. So it's fairly
Well, it,
interesting.
yeah, it's kind of it's an ever kind of evolving, conversation. There's kind of a, I guess, like a theory of like the, the great conversation that's happening, throughout Western sort of literature, and that we're kind of getting a chance to see that by, the way we're jumping around. Um, which has also made me think that, maybe, at some point, there's a fear that you could kind of get into a little bit of a rut or a hole, but we could just go from one to the next. Like if we were like, hey, let's do HD, you know
Mm,
um next week now, or do whoever could, we kind of follow this path,
right.
to the modern day, or wherever it leads us, to to uncover all these other schools. But I still like kind of bouncing around a little bit, but yeah, there's a greater conversation that's kind of happening that we're able to see. Um,
Right.
so
Right.
yeah, it is always kind of like a push pull, maybe like a little bit of a battle, or like one time period answers the call from another time period, and it's sort of, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Or one time period
Yeah,
rebels against another
yeah,
time period,
right, yeah,
which obviously Ezra Pound is sort of rebelling, against some of the horrors of World War One,
hmm
but are so and in some ways this has kind of let him down. Maybe some people would say some dark paths. Maybe
hmm
there's some be careful when fighting monsters
right,
kind of
right,
tied up in there, but some of the horrors of these world wars won't really become part of the zeitgeist until after World War II.
hmm
It's World War II that kind of brings the horror of some of these wars into the zeitgeist, but Ezra Pound was almost a year early. I mean, a world war early. The World War.
well,
Well,
yeah, sorry,
go
keep
for
going,
it.
keep going.
No, I was just gonna say, well, some of the way that World War One sort of affected him.
hmm
And sort of how the horrors of it, and some of the conclusions he drew from the war, kind of affected him moving forward into the 20th century.
yeah. Yeah, because well, I was gonna say, some of the things with World War II is that, and you talk about it becoming part of the common zeitgeist, like, we, for instance, like Ezra Pound is, and I don't know the full extent of it, but so I guess more or less accused of, kind of do, doing some, I guess, like, maybe proliferating anti-Semitic, viewpoints,
Mm,
which, to your point, World War II is where that kind of really, from our perspective, comes into like the common zeitgeist, as you were saying. And so it might seem like he's like a bit early because he's like, an anti-Semite, pre-World War II, and he's not a German, he's actually, uh, tried for treason for his involvement with, Mussolini in Italy.
mm-hmm.
Um, but the Jewish question was something that had, started in like the 1890s, and right at the
Right.
turn of the century. So this is something that, was kind of, it wasn't like just World War II happened and then all of a sudden people are like, whoa, the German, Nazi party, they were, putting Jewish people in concentration camps. Like, what, like it had been an ongoing political, um, s- kind of conversation, um, throughout Europe, and even the United States, um, about, sort of Jewish people, and like sort of more or less what to do, um, about them, because more of them wanted to go back, to Israel, and that, out of World War II, that's the solution ended up being, the Israel state. So, um,
Yeah, that is
those
that is
were
def
those were the political, those were the political, even to today, hot button issues.
Right. That's definitely one sort of aspect of it. But what I was talking about in general, in a sort of in my larger point with Ezra Pound by bringing up, him being a bit early was also just the horror of the war in general, the horror of the war, and that's why I said it kind of led him to some conclusions that today we would consider to be erroneous, is that, and also that would be considered to be anti-Semitic. But but beyond that, he had views of the war was so horrible that it shook his faith in humanity.
Hmm.
To where he thought that some of the way that the bankers and their money lending practices had to be sort of ended and could never be sort of sort of could never continue into the future.
Hmm.
But but not the specifics of that attitude, but just the idea that the war was so terrible that it shook his that it spurred within him a certain cynicism.
Hmm.
I also say that that's why I said that after World War II is when we get the postmodern cynicism, and
Hmm.
that's the zeitgeist that I was kind of talking about,
Okay.
like
Yeah.
the cynicism of the sort of the
Hmm.
postmodern world can be traced like to World War II
Hmm.
in many instances.
Yeah.
And that
Well.
and it's interesting that a lot of the people who were writing about this were French, which is where
Hmm.
Ezra Pound was, France, and
Hmm.
a lot of the early, of these American modernist writers, they were in France.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so he would have been ahead of his time, and I think like with the some of the anti-Semitic views, like how that, um, and even the, um, like I believe more or less that like the English were like a slave, to your point about bankers, slave, basically like a slave nation to like the Rothschilds,
Mm,
like he's almost kind of like he reminds me almost of like Kanye West, a
mm,
bit, or like even like Alex Jones, but like a poet,
mm,
you know. He was kind of like almost on that kind of um bent a little bit. I mean, uh, when he was tried for treason, he was put in a mental institute, um, there's, for a psych ward, he was found to be unfit to stand trial.
it's kind of interesting that you brought up Kanye West, because I imagine Ezra Pound is he's almost sort of closer to like a Terrence Howard than some of the other poets that we've talked about, because he imagines his poetry as having this sort of responsibility to change the world,
Right.
which
Yeah.
is
He
what
was
a lot of
political, like consciously political.
right. So he's imagining his poetry as having the ability to change the world, not from a point of view of necessarily his skin color, like, oh, my skin color gives me this responsibility, but it's almost like he's coming at it from the fact that he does have this education, or he has this
Hmm.
sort of this knowledge, or this
Hmm.
he
Yeah.
has the sort of access to this tradition that
Hmm.
causes him to sort of stand to have a responsibility.
Hmm.
um and that's what and that kind of notion, that even though that does seem like a post World War II notion, like maybe like even a post civil rights notion in America, it is interesting that the civil rights movement and even some of these notions, they do have history on the European continent. Even the direct action of a Martin Luther King
Right.
is first evidence in the European continent. And this kind of gets into the poem that I'm going to be doing, but
Hmm.
Ezra Pound, he views himself as having a responsibility, much like certain people of today, whether they be people of color or members of the LGBT community, they view themselves as also having a responsibility to sort of change the world.
Yeah. I think with Ezra Pound and someone like Kanye West and someone like Walt Whitman, because I think of Ezra Pound in this regard being very much still like of the, you know, within the American tradition, and even, coming from someone like Whitman, who like free verse, and getting the language of the common man, and even having this sort of almost had this like prophet like sort of tone,
Mm,
almost like he had something to say,
right.
and someone like Kanye West, I feel like is like that as well, and like Ezra Pound, and yeah, it is, like maybe a feeling of social responsibility, kind of similar to what you're saying. Like it can manifest itself that way. Um,
Hmm.
like, maybe members of, Black community or LGBT community, like you were mentioning. But I feel like it's almost like something even deeper within that, almost like this, like sort of, there's almost like this megalomaniac quality to it. Like
Mm,
almost like a belief that they're like touched by God, you know, like like he has to, he is gonna leave his mark,
mm,
um, uh, like even on, how, and he did, how poetry, what poetry itself looks like, it wasn't just through his poems alone that he left his mark, like say like a Robert Frost, or that's what I would think of, someone who wrote a poetry, and his poetry itself like really, more affected us. Ezra Pound even, more affected us through his contributions as a editor, and through the connections that he made throughout the art community, and influencing other people in the art that they made.
mm. Well, if you to piggyback off what you're saying, if you think that the world can be changed, because that is an idea of itself, that the
Hmm.
world can be changed,
Hmm.
you know, in order to undertake such a monumental task, you may have to be sort of touched by God, or it may behoove one to think that they are sort of touched by God. And I also think it's interesting, the line between social responsibility and cynicism. It's almost a lot. It's and it's similar between it's almost like a line between like modernism and postmodernism, where people may not view themselves as being cynical, but if the world needs changing, that that is almost like a cynicism, because you are saying the world needs to be changed. And if you say that you have the knowledge to change it for the better, you are almost saying that you are touched by God, for better or worse. Like,
And would you say it could be an optimistic point of view though too at the same time, or if you think that the world could be better, perhaps could that be, say an optimistic
yeah,
point of view,
I
like
mean,
Imagine by John Lennon,
right. That's what I'm saying. It's kind of it's like a thin line between
hmm because
like
it could be cynicism. Yeah, it could be expressed as cynicism, or it could be expressed as, maybe like a hopeful, you know.
and it could be expressed as a hope, as a hope for sure. But the
Hmm.
rub is when the person claims that they know how to make the world better. I mean, because the world is a place that has a million different variables
Yeah,
swirling around all at once. How can are you sure that you know how to make it better? And and
yeah,
if the answer to that is yes, that is almost communicating I am sort of touched by God.
yeah. It's not always a negative thing though, right? Because I
No,
mean,
not always. Not always a negative
because you
thing.
could
Because
say like, "Hey, Martin Luther King, so you're telling me you're touched by God?" You know?
right, some
Uh,
individuals may be
mhm.
touched by God.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know who is and
Right,
who is not,
right.
but I am recognizing that that is an idea, or
Hmm.
like
Right.
there are these certain idea packages.
Hmm.
These ideas sort of come with a package. So
Hmm.
so if someone in the street is telling me they know how to get to the utopia, I'm not going to say anything, but in the back of my head, I'm going to think that person probably thinks they are touched by a divine entity or something.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. Well, I wonder if someone could even do that without maybe even knowing. Could one be innocent in doing that?
That's
Could they
interesting.
be, could they be touched by God? Could they lead the way to greener pastures, and yet maybe not necessarily recognize it.
That's a age old question. That's sort of like, do
Yeah,
people have ideas or do ideas have people?
yeah,
I don't know. I don't have an answer to that one. But
no,
that is sort of like what you're sort of touching on. Could
yeah,
someone be sort of possessed by this idea and not quite be aware of it?
right, right, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, because I mean, we're able to see, we're reading works from artists who have long been dead, right? Um, Oftentimes, and yet we're able to understand them to some degree, you know,
mm-hmm,
and so without any, we don't have to know what they know necessarily. In some regards, maybe we might know a bit of what they know, but it's not
mm-hmm,
like we have to have their same education, or um, and
right.
yet we can see, we can feel, connect with the spirit of the writing, you know. Um,
Mm,
and so, yeah, I think that kind of goes back to like, even like knowledge, is it a priori, are are we a tabula rasa, are we a blank slate, are we, do we have some pre-programming? um it's kind
yeah.
it's kind of hard to say, but I feel like in some ways it's almost an argument for us having some pre-programming, some prior knowledge, when we're able to communicate through sort of the ages, um, without
Mm,
knowing some of the same without knowing some of the same stuff. Like we sometimes we may go through some deep personal affliction, and we don't realize it until we read Saint John of the Cross's Dark Night of the Soul, and then we're like, oh, this guy's in I think like 1600s or something like that, and like how is he, how is this describing exactly what I've gone through, and yet no one around me seems to have known anything about this kind of thing, or ever talked to me about it, but yet here he is, hundreds of years ago, he seems to have
and
just
it
done the
is
same thing.
and it is a very thin line because like you said, the whole the tabula rasa, the blank slate. Some a person could say that, well, if humans are all a blank slate, then that means that they all have to be treated with respect because they're in the image of God. Or someone could say a person is a blank slate, so therefore I know how to best mold them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, someone could have the same premise but arrive at two completely different conclusions.
Right. Yeah, that is true.
So, in some
Yeah.
ways, that's part of the back and forth that we've been experiencing this entire podcast.
Mhm. Mhm.
You
Yeah.
know, in a way, the sophist kind of show us that a person can take a fact and twist it two different, completely different ways.
Yeah.
I feel like that is the a good definition of sophistry.
Well, and that's what we've. I mean, you said we. This is what we've been going through with, you know, with this show. This is kind of what we've been going back and forth with, and there's even an argument like this is what we've been going back and forth with through even our politics. I feel like,
Yeah.
between those who know how the best way to go about things, and those who are maybe willing to give I guess maybe power to individuals.
Or to admit they
Yeah,
don't know,
yeah, yeah.
which is really what Socrates did in the face
Hmm.
of the sophists. I don't know, which is why Socrates was asking the questions.
Hmm. No, no, we're the ones that ask the questions around here. We want to know exactly what you're up to.
Right.
We want to know
So
just what you mean.
I mean, hey, without further ado, I mean,
Hmm.
maybe we should get into the
Let's,
poems. I
I
mean,
guess so. 29 minutes in, I guess we could probably do. I mean, that's what we're here for, right?
but I mean, I think that preamble was appropriate because
Yeah.
this guy Ezra Pound, he's almost like hidden. People don't
Hmm.
want to talk about him.
Yeah, no,
He's
he's not well known. He would. I
but
went to Barn. Yeah,
he's
I went to.
influential
Yeah,
though. He
yeah.
should be more well known.
Right, right.
He should be
Yeah.
more
Uh-huh.
they people prefer to discuss in schools his peripheral, his friends, and
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
people that knew him.
Yeah.
But this guy is almost like a central figure in a
Hmm.
web of early modernist poets.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I went to Barnes and Noble the other day. No, just real quick
Okay.
to go along with what you're saying, and I did pick up a copy of Ada Limon. I think is that I'm pronouncing that right? She's our current poet laureate.
Okay.
So just side point. But I tried to see if they had something by Ezra Pound. They had William Carlos Williams. They had T.S. Eliot.
Oh
They
yeah.
didn't have Ezra Pound. I went to the to this woman, working, there, and I was like, hey, can I ask you if you can look up a book for me? I just want to see if you have anything by Ezra Pound. She's like, who? And yeah, like Pound, spelled it for her. She's like, eh, what was his first name? Ezra. Ezra? Yep. Yes. Yeah. And I was like, I'm sure she reads books. I'm sure.
Right.
I'm not saying like, but it just kind of goes to show that like I know that if I was like, hey, you got anything by William Carlos Williams or maybe T.S. Eliot, she probably may know who I'm talking about maybe more readily than, hey, you got anything from Ezra Pound too? Yeah.
To be honest, I only kind of found out about Ezra Pound through like reading about the William Carlos Williams and the
Hmm.
T.S. Eliot's and even the beat poets. It took me a
Yeah.
minute to, and I
Hmm.
actually just kept seeing the name,
Hmm. Yeah.
and it took me a minute to really be like, okay, this is one guy, and kind of put my beat on him. He's kind of undercover a bit, and
Yeah.
I think he's worth talking about. I think his
Hmm.
poetry he actually has some very beautiful poetry. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. And
as far
interesting
as
ideas as well. Very influential.
people might hate it, but I consider the author to be dead. I mean, I approach people's works just on the strength of their works. I don't care if
Mm-hmm.
they ate people's brains or what.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I
What?
don't I don't get on a sort of a moral high horse with any of these guys. I
Right,
don't I
right.
don't really,
I
yeah,
don't burden my poetry with much responsibility either. But
right. Yeah.
there's a
Or
lot of
my
artists
life.
who, yeah,
Um I mean,
exactly.
look, I run from responsibility, so I mean, holding these guys up to any kind of standard. I mean, come on now.
People would point at us and cry privileged.
Yeah,
They would, but
yeah.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. I'm
Right.
writing for my muse, man.
Right. Yeah. I don't. Yeah.
I never
Yeah.
wrote for anybody else, and I'm not going to
Right.
start now.
Yeah.
So Ezra Pound. I mean, he's a figure. Look him up,
Yeah.
make draw your own conclusions.
Mm,
But did you want to go
yeah.
first, Jess, or should I? I mean,
I can. Yeah. I can go
okay,
first. I don't care. I don't
okay,
know if I don't even know what order we've been going in
me
lately.
neither.
If it's to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Um.
So yeah, it's just
But yeah, I can go first here. So
all
I'm
right,
doing Fragmenti. So Fragmenti by Ezra Pound.
right. Did you were just gonna jump right into it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay,
I'm just gonna
okay.
go ahead and read it, and then I'll,
All right. Pardon me. Pardon me.
yeah. Sorry, what are you trying to ice me out here or something? Make it. All right. So, O tender-heartedness, right bitter groan, because they knew thee not in all the world, nor would that gentleness thou hast to give. And our chevaliers in the court of him who reigneth over where the stars grow dim beyond our sight, marble smooth by flowing waters grown. Yeah, marble smooth by flowing waters grown.
Marble
So,
smooth.
marble smooth, marble smooth. So fragmenti. This is fragmenti is like Italian or even Latin for fragment, obviously, right? And this kind of reminds me. I mean, you have these three little parts that are sort of that are connected, but kind of also kind of not, in a way,
Mm.
3 little scraps. And, fragmenti is also a fragmenti decada, fragmenti cata, or cato is uh, like a style of tile, Italian like style of like tile that they do. Kind
Okay.
of you would see it like in bathrooms, it's like pretty common, pretty popular. Um, but kind of particular to Florence, Italy.
Mm.
And what this poem also, to me, also being with kind of the fragment, these different fragments, I think of, it's almost it reminds me of like this is almost like something you would find like maybe like in a manuscript or
Mm.
like on the walls of somewhere ancient in in Italy from from Rome, and these little fragments, like sometimes a lot of the Greek poetry that we have is like that, where it's kind of incomplete. You just have and also going with some of his ideas of imagism. It doesn't follow, poetry doesn't follow the metronome. It follows the musical phrase. And
Mm.
I think of these 3 fragments as 3 little musical phrases, almost like 3 little blues licks.
Okay.
And and because it's not to the metronome.
Right.
Although there's a certain music to it. um, the first one, "O tender heartedness, right bitter groan, because they knew thee not in all the world, nor would that gentleness thou hast to give." There's something there. I don't know. There's some
Mm.
music there. It's not like a.
Right.
It's not an exact. It's not a fleshed out song. You know. It's just a little. It's a couple bars, a couple chords.
Mm.
Um, and our chevaliers in the court of him who reigneth ever, where the stars grow dim beyond our sight. Yeah, I shouldn't have a pause there. Where the stars grow dim beyond our sight, but still, you kind of have that, the him, the dim,
Mm.
beyond our sight. It's not a perfect. Um, it's not by the metronome, and that's something very very modernistic.
Mm.
That
Mm.
breaking of with the forms, and even with this not coming out and saying exactly what it is, right?
Right.
It's these kind of 3 fragments, I think, sort of kind of paint a picture. They're sort of almost 3, uh sort of separate, maybe panels, maybe 3 different portraits that, overall give you, sort of paint a full picture for you.
Mm.
Um, and I think that maybe all art is like that, right? Or maybe even life is like that. Maybe this art is closer to life, because it's not nice and neat and tied up with a bow. It is
Mm.
sort of incomplete, and maybe true art or music, is like that. It's never quite finished. It's it's, but it's sweet and it kind of leaves you wanting more. He's
It's
not.
not. It's
Yeah.
not metric. You
Right.
know. It's
Yeah.
not. It's not. It's not snapped to a grid.
Right, yeah, yeah, and you're never quite able to capture this, right?
Mm.
It's almost a little, you know, it's a little, it's kind of ephemeral in that sense. And it's fragmentary. It's a fragment.
Right. Right. It's fragment. It's fragmentary. It definitely reminds you of, like, little snapshots that would be on a piece of pottery or something. Or
Yep,
what I
yeah.
find interesting is it's almost put together. It's almost like these could be 3 sort of disparate things.
Yes.
They're sort of put
Mm-hmm.
together. They're
Mm-hmm.
fitted together, almost like
Mm-hmm.
puzzle pieces.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can remember correctly, there was some people in the uh, early beat movement who would want to clip little pieces of poetry and
Yes.
sort of put them
Mm-hmm.
together. So I think that's kind of the idea here. Little fragments that
Mm-hmm.
we put together, little snapshots.
Yep.
they're almost like they're reminiscent of haikus.
Mm, mm,
We know Pound. He had an affinity for sort of Eastern poetry. The whole Imagist movement was sort of based in sort of haikus and things like that. So.
yeah. Well, also with it kind of being like the, like little blues licks, which, the beats, they were, they were into the blues, obviously, right? Like Jack Kerouac, he had his blues. Allen Ginsberg, had blues. There's kind of an affinity there with music, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and I think as there should be, you know,
Right.
with poetry and with music and with visual arts in a sense, and so that's where we get, kind of uh, there's a music quality and there's an image, right? There's a
Mm-hmm.
picture that it kind of gives us, and with these kind of being like blues licks, there's also they're almost like the content is, it's almost like the spirit of blues too, you know. Oh, tenderheartedness, right, bitter groan, right? Like, think of this is someone who's like, there's like a longingness, not only is the poem incomplete, the first section, there's an incompleteness, right?
Right.
There's a tender-heartedness, right, bitter groan. This tender heart is grown bitter, and there's blues and rock songs about that, even to today, about
Right.
not letting your heart turn, bitter cold by the world. But in this, that is what has happened, right? um because they knew thee not in all the world, nor would that gentleness thou hast to give. This is almost like a longing, this is a longing for the beloved, like that divine beloved. It could be God, it could be a lover. It is, it is, that other, um,
Mm-hmm.
and the second one kind of paints us a different picture, but it kind of layers into our the meaning too. It kind of helps round out the total picture, right? In our chevaliers in the court of him, chevaliers, those are like, knights,
Right.
in a court, of a king, right? And we also think of, God, even, in Christianity, is, the Lord of hosts. He has his sort of heavenly court, and here, and our chevaliers, and there's not a we, but it's almost kind of implied, and our chevaliers in the court of him who reigneth ever, where the stars grow dim beyond our sight. um this is almost, it kind of almost, in a way, it sort of um emphasizes that longing for the beloved in the first fragment, and emphasize it in the sense that, sort of emphasizes our inability, um, to almost to do anything about it, our almost our we're just chevaliers in the court of
Mm.
him. He reigneth as far as the eyes can see, even, where the stars grow dim beyond our sight. The whole, we are almost, we, almost lack, uh it's almost bad luck in a
Yeah.
sense. And isn't that like a lot of blues songs,
Yeah.
kind
Unlucky.
of being down on your luck, and
Right. Right.
being, forlorn, by God and woman,
Right.
and 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 then this last one, marble smooth by flowing waters grown. uh, you know is this too, marble? Are we the marble, and is the palm also the marble? It's just this one. Has this also been smoothed out, you know,
Mm.
whittled, almost whittled down, eroded by the flowing waters, maybe by living waters? This is almost like the spirit flowing over matter, this hard matter, marble smooth by flowing waters grown. This is kind of almost, the this almost describes, like, talking about Eastern philosophy, and Pound's appreciation for it. With this is like the dir. The dir is the power. It's how the Tao
Mm.
acts through, um, through the world. And so that is how, like this, I'm interpreting it as love, that we are lacking in the first, uh, phrase, and in the second phrase that we're almost sort of doomed, not maybe not doomed, but doomed, but we're almost we are at the mercy of him who reigneth, ever.
Mm.
And but through this process, marble smooth by flowing waters grown, perhaps it gets out all the edges, the rough edges.
I see the flowing waters as almost like life, life sort of,
Yeah, lifetime.
sort of
Yeah.
whittling down sort of the
hmm
rough parts or the pointy parts, or, maybe like the marbles, to be marble smooth might be the same as being, bitter. Like,
mm.
like it,
Maybe.
like in the first fragment, oh tender heartedness, right bitter groan.
hmm
The through his trials and tribulations in the world, his tender heartedness has grown bitter. So, that bitterness is compared to being is odd, but maybe that bitterness is marble smooth, whereas when he was tender hearted, there was all sorts of hooks and different things that his heart could sort of get hung up on.
Yeah, I think. See, I kind of think of it as that bitterness being one of those hooks. Being like tenderheartedness, bitter, and and then kind of through the submission, in the second verse, then we get to the smoothness. But it's almost like maybe marble smooth by flowing waters. Like if there's even like if it's cutting a line through marble, yeah, you know eh, that the bitterness and the tenderheartedness could be the two edges.
Mm, it could
I
be.
don't, that's that's kind of how I'm looking at it.
I just think there might be something there. Oh, tender heartedness, right bitter grown, marble smooth
hmm
by flowing waters grown. Like
hmm
saying, both of these are the way the use of the word grown, like
hmm
his tender heartedness grown bitter, and
hmm
and he's also become marble smooth over time. The time is sort of smooth. The flowing waters of the world have sort of
Right.
made him smooth. Because there's
hmm
also that because there's also interesting right bitter grown. I wondered, is that right meaning like, is that right an intensifier of the word bitter, like wow, this is right bitter, or is he saying like right as in correct, like oh tender heartedness grown bitter correct in a correct way, like
hmm
my heart has become bitter correctly because they knew thee, because they knew my heart not in all the world, nor would that gentleness thou hast to give.
hmm
So it was correct that his heart has grown bitter because
Maybe. Yeah.
none of the world knew it, you
Yeah.
know?
Maybe. I guess I'm reading it a little bit maybe more optimistically and thinking that with the marble smooth by flowing waters grown, I hear you on the using the same word grown there,
Mm-hmm.
but as even that first one being like a step in the process.
Mm. I can
Um,
see that too, though.
because
I can see that too.
because because I'm thinking marble smooth by flowing waters grown, like that being the marble smooth is almost like maybe a contentment, maybe a place of contentment can win on,
Right.
but that's where I'm like, where, is the bitterness? Are you still, is that part of the contentment? Um, is that, is being bitter, being content? And that's where I kind of,
Mm.
feel that I'm not sure that, you know,
I don't know. There's no
yeah, I
definite
don't know.
answer. I guess.
There isn't, right. And that's what I'm saying. Like I'm kind of taking a little bit more of an optimistic view of it and saying that that's more of the process rather than saying that um, he's that the bitterness is the end.
Mm. I also that's kind of just how I read it, but
Hmm.
also I just feel like it'd be kind of an interesting juxtaposition for like the bitterness to be considered like marble smooth, or but I guess I was just thinking like the world wore him down to bitterness the
Hmm.
same way the waters wore the rock down to marble smooth or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I kind of
Yeah.
took in marble smooth to be like a river rock, like a
Hmm.
smooth
Hmm.
river rock.
Yep. Yeah.
But yeah, um and our and and our chevaliers in the court of him who reigneth ever where the stars grow dim beyond our sight. I guess there's like a who reigneth ever where the stars grow dim beyond our sight. I guess there's a place, there's even a place for God sort of beyond where man can see, but maybe his emotions, his feelings are sort of just like members of court because the him is uppercase. I'm kind of wondering who's he
Right.
speaking
Generally,
to?
you would think that if it's capital him, it's like referring to like God. Generally,
Right.
I think it's probably how like a lot of Christian readers would probably, or just people in the West. I'm not saying like like in today's term, like Christians. Like just people who
Mm-hmm.
grew up in in the Christian tradition. As part of that.
Right. Right. But yeah, man. I mean, hey, I kind of like the poem. Little fragments, almost like a little notebook snapshots or something.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. That's what I was kind of thinking about it too a little bit. Kind of reminded me of myself of just some you know things that I've done. But obviously his has a special I guess special quality to it.
Mm,
As maybe I'm assigning a special quality to it because it's published and he's well known and or revered, and so that makes it that much better or good.
mm. No, I mean, I thought it was pretty good. Um, I kind of like how I like how in Romance languages the plural they pluralize a word with just the vowel. Like fragmenti, and the word is
Mm-hmm.
pluralized. Whereas, like, I guess the singular would be something like fragmentum or fragmentus,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But we can get into the poem that I chose. I chose the poem "An Immorality" by Ezra Pound, and gonna get into this poem. This poem it kind of has a lot of things going on. It's just like kind of more than meets the eye, but it kind of definitely deals with some of the things we were talking about earlier. So there'll be some opportunities for some full circle moments. But without further ado, I shall read An Immorality by Ezra Pound. An Immorality. Sing we for love and idleness, not else is worth the having. Though I have been in many a land, there is not else in living. And I would rather have my sweet, though rose leaves die of grieving, than do high deeds in Hungary to pass all men's believing. An Immorality by Ezra Pound. And this poem is perfect because we were just talking about, or it's perfect for this for our purposes, because we were just talking about some writers how they view themselves as having a responsibility to to do this in the world, to do that in the world, to to bring this about or to try to bring that about. But the poem, if we just take not the title but just the poem itself, it appears to be a song for love and idleness. The author said, the poet says he's been to many a land, but not else is there's nothing else in living except to be in love and to be idle, to spend your time hanging out. And I would rather have my sweet. He would rather have his lover, even though rose leaves die of grieving. You know, um, he would rather have that, and even he would rather have his sweet, even though time passes and all things must die, than to do high deeds in Hungary to pass all men's believing. There's some people who would rather do these high deeds and be on the right side of history and make this real and that real and this you take us to this utopia and that. But Ezra Pound here says that all of that is for naught, that he would rather sing for love and idleness. But the kicker of this poem is that it's titled An Immorality. There's something immoral about just wanting love and idleness. There's something, it's almost not up to snuff. There's something almost, maybe there's something immoral about a love, to sing for love and idleness. And then Line of Pound, getting tied up with Italian fascism and trying to sort of shake up, uh, the world of Europe post World War I. Maybe that would be seen as moral. Maybe some of the action in war was moral or needed to happen. Maybe it needed to be the case. And there's a part of the poet that you know even though he wanted the love and the idleness and to just be with his loved ones, and to not necessarily worry about doing high deeds, there's something about that that's immoral. So I don't know if you had anything respond to that,
Yeah,
Just.
yeah. I mean, I think with I think a few things with this. One, there is a bit of this is a knowing the poet's life and with sort of the message of this poem. Um, it's kind of funny. It's almost like tongue in cheek, like
Right.
in the sense that there's sort of this great sort of hypocritical nature of this, because I'm thinking like with like John Lennon, even
Mm,
I'm thinking of him, and him being killed because I forget the guy's name, but he thought he like Holden Caulfield and Catcher in the Rye thought that Lennon was one of the bastards, thought that
mm,
he because he was a hypocrite, right? He I think the song like Imagine, and him kind of talking about giving just basically living a maybe like a hermetic lifestyle, I guess, or but actually living a lavish one, right? It's
mm.
only then that he could tell us that no, that money can't buy you love. Only when you
Right.
have all the money can you tell someone that. It's like the guys with the MBAs that tell you, I never needed an MBA,
Right.
to do all the things I needed to do. Or it's it's like going back to Kanye West. It's like Kanye West telling you that good girl is worth 1,000 bitches. And
Right.
why does
Right.
Kanye West know that?
Yeah. Exactly.
So Ezra Pound. I mean, look, in his life, he's the one who's doing high deeds in Hungary.
Right.
He's the one who's going off and trying to, he's doing, work on behalf of, Benito, Mussolini and his Italian fascists. He's trying to get involved and do all this kind of stuff. And he has not lived his life, in idleness and, just spending time with his loved ones.
Right.
That is not the life that he has chosen for himself. And so, of course, uh, he may think that that is what is truly worth having. Just as one who maybe has lived the opposite would think that, no, if only I had some great responsibility to the world and could go out and and do great
Mm.
things abroad, and beyond the believing of men, then that is truly the worth life having.
Very interesting. Yeah. So, like, as Ezra Pounds, getting involved in all these political movements, and not only
Hmm.
political, poetic movements, and
Hmm.
he's
Hmm.
very much like one that gets involved and start things. Of
Right.
course, he
Yeah.
would. Of course, he would. Tell us that there's nothing in life but love and idleness.
Right.
But is there a tacit admission to this whole turn? To this turn. By
Hmm.
titling the poet and
Yes.
the poem and
Yeah.
immorality.
And yes, and I think the reason is even, and I don't know where this idea necessarily comes from. So forgive me, an audience, forgive me. But if you know, let us know in the comments, of course. But to him who knows, the rational, the life of the rational life,
Mm-hmm.
an animal life would never do, right? And
Mm.
so I think what he is maybe saying here is that because he does feel this great responsibility, maybe to the world, because he does believe that it is within his power and his ability to change, for him to turn his back on that and live this life that's all there really is worth having, is to live in idleness with your loved ones. For him, that would be perhaps a great sin,
Mm.
and a wasting of his talents. Think of Jesus's parable of the talents.
Right, right. And so there's something there is something here where because the way that people would accuse, they would, or someone like Ezra, they would say that, oh, if he were in the modern day, they would want him, they would think like, that he's making the best of his privilege, if he was like an educated sort of a white male, viewing that he needed to help the world, save the world, or help the world progress, which in a
Mm.
sense he was progressive. He was imagining himself as knowing how to progress the world. It's just
Hmm.
that when we look back at Ezra Pound through our lens, we realize that he was not progressive in a way that is palatable to our progressives today,
Right.
but
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
still he still had all the
Hmm.
framework, the same framework there,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm. Hmm.
Ezra, I could imagine Ezra Pound being like, I have to use my privilege. He would sort of, I mean, and obviously, if he were in his own time, he would say, I have to use my privilege to advance fascism. But if he would have been in a time like ours, I could easily see him trying to use his privilege to advance, a certain progressivism, or a certain,
Right. Right. Right.
egalitarianism of our day. Um,
Correct.
to be on the right side of
Yeah.
history, doing those high deeds in
Hmm.
Hungary.
Right.
You know,
Yes.
um,
Yeah. He would be doing that.
but
Although some would want to say, because he was with the fascists then, that he would probably be on the side of, like, say, Trump today. But
that
that is
that could
probably
be as
unlikely the case. I also don't see him being. That is not. That would not be his. That doesn't appear to be his cause.
no,
Um,
because Trump wants to
so
make America great again, which
right,
implies the past. And
right,
Ezra, his I
yes,
think his motto was "Make it new." Ezra Pound's motto was
yeah,
"Make it new," if
hmm,
I'm not mistaken. So
yeah,
he was almost like an accelerationist, wanting to kind of push us
yeah,
into the future, which is, you could say there's an element of the progressive wing that is also like that.
right, yeah. I mean, but you need the two, So,
Yeah, and we are
yeah,
incommunicado.
right, and they don't exist, and that's the thing with history, and we've kind of talked about this a bit on the show. We still like to button things up, make them nice and neat, um, and things that don't necessarily fit within our nice, neat, tidy, narratives. We ignore them. We kick them out, right? So, we would love, and this just shows the sort of the complexity of some of these relationships. when you think, because now we want to say in our kind of common parlance, political dialogue, the right side is they're the fascists, the left
Mm,
side is the progressives that and you know but Ezra Pound is, yeah, like you said, he's more progressive, but he was also pushing for fascism. And that was kind of seen as the new, more of the avant-garde, in a way of
right, right.
ordering and structuring society.
Was yeah.
So and,
One
and
of
it's also yeah.
what were we gonna say?
So you say it's also interesting, with him being in Italy at the time. Obviously, the Catholic Church, had no qualms, to say the least, about Benito Mussolini and his, um, or any of the former Holy Roman Empire, parts of the Holy Roman Empire, Italy, or Nazi Germany, or Austria, these places that combined to be the axis or the central powers, also, you know, maybe just happen to be the former parts of the Holy Roman Empire, that was controlled by the Catholic Church. So it's kind of interesting that he would have some, we also consider him to be anti-Semitic viewpoints, um,
Mm,
and sort of the way that they kind of tried to answer the Jewish question, which also might line up more with the right today, and how you know I mean, we'll see, but we've had heard promises of having the largest deportation uh, you know
yeah,
operation
ever in
in
history.
history, in U.S. history. So, um, and there again, that's where these lines kind of blur.
Right. Um. Yeah, and it's interesting that Ezra Pound, his sort of anti-Semitism was out of a almost like out of a fear of war. It's kind of strange, but he was saying like the like World War I was so horrible that we can't allow like sort of the Jewish bankers to continue how they were. Um,
Hmm.
there
Hmm.
are parallels today. People say that in Israel, it's Israel's so horrible, the atrocities
Right.
of the war.
Hmm. Hmm.
Sort of must be stopped. But
Right.
it's interesting. People can start with the same, like, because sort of the
Yeah.
postmodernists, they had
And
the
that would
same idea that
yeah.
the war was so horrible
Uh-huh.
it
Yeah.
could never be repeated.
Yeah. And sorry, and real quick, you that also is another point that could be like on the left today, with people being sort of anti, sort of Israel, or even being more anti-Israel state, or even, being pro-Hamas. Um, you know, we would maybe see Ezra Pound be on that side.
We could. That's what I'm saying. Like we talked about earlier, the sophists taught us that you can take the same premise and arrive
Hmm.
at two completely contradictory conclusions. So
Hmm.
if
Right.
that's the case, you almost have to kind of go back to, I guess, what they would call first principles. Um, do you believe that words have a meaning? You know, some people would say that words only the only use of words is sort of for your power dynamic. Your words are tools to be used in a power dynamic. So that would mean that no, words don't have their own meaning. The only meaning is sort of power. But then you could
Yeah.
say,
Yeah. Or
but
what they convey, what they communicate.
then there's the other notion that words do have a meaning on their own. So there's several conversations going on in our culture, in our world, in our
Hmm.
podcast.
Hmm. Hmm.
Something that I just like to highlight in this third stanza right here. And I would rather have my sweet, though rose leaves die of grieving. It's just an interesting image that the leaves of a rose die because they are grieving. They're it's
Hmm.
I just felt like that's a very kind of a beautiful image.
They almost die in they almost wither away, die in like their sadness at withering away.
Yeah, yeah, they almost
Yeah.
grieve themselves, you know,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Yeah.
which is what he's sort of doing in this. He's sort of grieving
Mm,
himself. It's an
yeah.
immorality, you know. Um,
Mm. Well, it reminds me too of Robert Frost's, Nothing Gold Can Stay,
yeah, yeah.
in some of the images he has there, even, nature's early leaves to flower, right?
Mm, yeah, I think so.
Uh,
Something like that.
Only so an hour. Her
Mm,
first hue is green, but I don't,
yeah,
I
yeah,
forget.
yeah.
I used to kind of have that one down, but um, it kind of reminds me of that a bit.
Mm.
And I wonder, Hungary. I mean, is that even like, an allusion to, because Hungary is where modern day, uh,
Germany,
oh, well,
Austria, Austria.
no, I'm thinking of Turkey. Never mind.
Mm. Well, you know, I mean, because you know what, you know, Hungary was a place where a lot of this political unrest was going on, and a lot of the, you know, World War I. You know,
Well, and also broke off from because it was Austro-Hungary because it was the end of the Austro-Hungarian, Austro-Hungary where it was an empire that broke
mm,
up, that split during this time. So um, political unrest, to say the least, is your to your point.
and I just, I love all, and I love the use of these ing, I think that's called the infinitive form. These ing verbs with the v, having, living,
Hmm.
grieving, believing.
Hmm.
You know, I actually love this poem. Um, it's
Hmm.
this
Yeah,
poem.
it's a
It
good one.
really,
It's a good one.
it really captures the artist's dilemma. I mean, because you know,
Yeah.
in some ways, the artist seeks to be almost in like a state of the womb. You know, there's a love and being in love, being idle. That's
Hmm.
where some there's is a there is beautiful poetry has come from that. There's also beautiful poetry that's come from action. But you know, we know that in order to really live life, you do have to kind of get up and get out there too. So
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, there's double sides to this. You know, there's two
Hmm.
sides. You know, there's two sides to every coin. But I would rather
Yeah.
have my sweet though rose leaves die of grieving than do high deeds in Hungary to pass on men's believing.
it, it reminds me too a bit of I mentioned John Lennon earlier, but Paul McCartney and Wings, and silly little love songs. People
Mm,
say they've had enough of silly little love songs,
yeah, yeah.
and what's wrong with that? I need to know. Uh, you know, I mean, I guess yeah. Sometimes he in that song as well is just kind of saying like, hey, I mean that. What else is there?
Right. Not else is worth the having.
Mm-hmm.
You know. But in a way, he can't quite be comfortable with himself because it is an immorality.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. He has this pull. He doesn't feel right sitting still.
Mm.
It's almost I was thinking there's books there's a book like this too. I don't know. It's I don't know if this applies. Is Pilgrim's Progress? I mean, could he have stayed? No, because if he had stayed
It was
where he
being
was,
destroyed, wasn't it?
right, it was going to be destroyed. Yeah, trying to think I mean in Paulo the Alchemist, I believe he also has the opportunity to kind of stay. It's almost like staying with the goddess in a way.
Mm. Yeah, it
It's
is.
almost kind of like it's like that stage of like, look, I've been around and I see that this is the goddess, and like this is
Mm-hmm.
almost like with uh I think is
Odysseus
yeah, Odysseus. That's what I was gonna
With
say. Yeah,
Cersei.
yeah,
What
and
didn't Cersei tell him that he could stay with her?
Yeah, yep,
He
yep,
almost did.
yeah, and even and even being in the land with the lotus flowers, you know.
The land with the lotus flower.
Yeah, they were all just kind of like they all ate the lotus flower and they just kind of like hung out. It was kind of like they were
Mm.
all just like stoned all the time.
Oh,
They
okay,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
they he got there and they just some of his men I think ate the lotus flower, just made him lazy and just want to just
Right, right,
hang
right.
out in relaxation and and sort of leisure.
And it's interesting. The bed of the goddess is always in the underworld.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so
So hey, I mean it's an immorality,
right, right, because the hero must get
right?
up and get
Uh-huh.
and keep
Uh-huh.
going up. You know,
Right. That's Pound. Pound's the hero. He's the.
it to in his own mind, if nowhere
Uh-huh.
else.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, hey, that's also why I think, even though he left the United States and even, was tried for treason against the United States, he still very much embodies the spirit of maybe the American or the West, the
Mm,
individual.
right,
And so, which is kind of funny, like he's also being an enemy of the, sort of the state, but almost like the
right.
embodiment of the spirit.
But
Uh,
in a way, he being a fascist, he believed in the state.
that is true. That also is true.
The fascists believed in the state. The
Hmm.
American, we believe in the Constitution, which is different.
Right, right.
Which Hitler had to learn the hard way. But
Hmm. Right. Yeah, we had to when we came and beat him over the head with it. Yeah.
but but these conversations, when you think about even nationalism, fascism, nationalism, it really goes back to Napoleon. America's right on the cusp of some of these, because when we had our revolution, we didn't necessarily need to dispose of the king. you know
Right. We could have made George Washington the king.
could have. George Washington metaphorically disposed of the king.
Right.
The French literally disposed of the king.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's the French Revolution is the same thing that Nietzsche talked about. It's the death of God. I mean,
Yeah.
if you kill the
Yeah.
king, what else
Right.
is going to be holy?
Yeah. But here's the thing with George Washington. While the French people disposed of the literal king, their king, right? The king
Right,
outside of themselves. George Washington, because he had the opportunity, really is the one who conquered the king within himself.
right. That is why on the ceiling of the Capitol building you have Washington's apotheosis. He became a god. He almost by he
Right.
became a god by denouncing his
Hmm.
ability to be godlike.
Right. He almost that it's almost like I mean this is him with in the 40 days with the desert, having Satan tempt, this is him, facing down Satan's temptations,
Right,
um, or even Buddha, facing down his sort of temptations, giving up his, because he could have lived as a prince,
right.
there, been a king himself.
But that's why once the French killed their king, since they needed a god, they realized Napoleon told them that the state was the god. That we are
Hmm.
this Napoleon said that we didn't kill the king. We we didn't kill the king, you know, basically we killed the king because we are French. And that's when people said, "Oh, we're French. That's why we killed the king." In a way, it was like only the French could do something
Hmm.
like this.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that worship, what do you call it? That admiration has to go somewhere. You
Hmm.
know what I mean?
Right.
It has to go somewhere.
We've talked about this in personal conversations as well. I mean, it's like Young and his sort of idea of we have this sort of religious instinct. We have
Mm,
this instinct within us to revere, to maybe praise, to glorify something, like
Right.
And
Got to serve somebody.
right, right. And we will do that. Obviously, one idea is, the only way to do that correctly is to just find the most high, you know, the
Mm,
the unmoved mover, the one,
right.
just praise that one that is responsible for all others. That's kind of what we've come to in the West with um, monotheism. Yeah.
But that is itself an idea,
Right.
this idea of the realm of the forms.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because while that was the French Revolution, but the American Revolution through the Declaration of Independence, we basically told the king that we're gonna peel off some of your godly powers and we're gonna have it
Hmm.
somehow, like like we hold these truths to be self-evident that you had godliness, but we're gonna take some of the godliness off of you and for ourselves.
Well, yeah, it's like, believing that those inalienable rights, they've been, vested,
Right.
within us by our creator. And we've all been created equally, by that creator. And so, you know, by
which is
virtue
very
of that, yeah.
which is very interesting because that is also an idea, like
Hmm.
how
Right,
how do they just decided that what we actually have pieces of God
right, yeah,
within us.
right. And as we were talking about earlier, this is part of a great conversation, that is being had, you know, throughout time. And that's why it's also important to read, to
Yeah,
read these
for
things,
sure.
so that you kind of have some context for, because whether we know it or not, we're a part of this ever evolving conversation. And some of us just pop right up in the middle of it, and we don't know what someone said before us.
Right.
We don't even, we aren't even thinking about, we just start, shooting off at the mouth,
Right,
Uh,
exactly.
yeah, so and some of us are playing telephone with it, um,
I mean,
so yeah.
there's so many different ways and caveats to look at things. I mean, it kind of just comes to it does. And the interesting thing, and I think what we're going to find out in the Western world is that, and we've talked about this before in private, but it's going to come down to our beliefs.
Mm, mhm, mhm,
What do you believe?
mhm. Right, yeah, yeah.
I mean, and there's going to be levels to it because
Mhm,
someone can believe that, like we said, just human beings are a blank slate.
mhm,
Someone can believe that. Someone can say, well, if human beings are a blank slate, we have to, fill them up with all of our histories and all of our traditions and all of
mhm.
our things like that. Someone can also say, well, if human beings are a blank slate, we can mold them to how we see fit.
Right, to whatever we need at the time. Yeah.
Both are logical, both are
Mhm.
just as logical.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it is
So I mean, there's no end to sophistry. Um, I don't want to. I don't know. How deep do I
we're
want to
going,
get?
I know we're going, yeah, we're taking this so many things.
Yeah,
The thing is though, I think, why we're
about to
having
start
this
preaching.
talk, right, why we're having this conversation about, this kind of greater conversation, is because Ezra Pound plays such a pivotal role in the formation of the modernist movement, and that is a major point in the conversation, uh,
Right.
a major point for us, um, and for literature in the West,
I
from
mean,
French to English.
world. I mean, this is before world. I mean, World War II is gonna just rip it all to pieces. Rip. It's gonna rip the mind to pieces. Like how are people? Because people are like all modernism, all throughout modernism and the modern period, we're getting more advanced and more enlightened. And
Hmm.
these people don't need to be treated this way, and these
Right.
people don't need to be treated this way, and we love this, and we have this in our hearts and this in our souls. But to find out that people use trains and chemistry and all these things to commit genocide, which before would have just been used like swords, and is one thing to commit a genocide with swords and sticks, but it's another thing to use railroads and
Hmm.
machinery, and you know what I mean.
Right.
And
Yeah. Right. And
So
we also
it
feel like, we feel like we're becoming a machine, like there's even that, kind of feeling idea, which we've even become obsessed with since, creating robots,
right,
um
right. So World War II definitely instilled many people with a sense of responsibility that may not have necessarily been present in years past. But Ezra Pound, even though he may have had some shaky conclusions, he definitely also had a sense of responsibility from the horrors of World War I. He was kind of riled up and having these sort of he sort of saw these grand narratives shattering after World War I.
yeah. I
Whereas a
think that,
lot of whereas
yeah.
a lot of people in his position, it took until after World War II.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think oftentimes when you see people like this who are almost have this sort of prophetic like voice and vision, that they, you know, to your point earlier about, Ezra Pound also having, there's a certain level of optimism, right? In believing that you can be the change that,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that'll happen in the world. And then also having this sort of sense of sort of cynicism as well, kind of later on, and sort of, cynicism that you wouldn't see until much later after, maybe even until after the 60s, and uh, I think that oftentimes what you see, with these prophetic voices is that they almost often contain like both, sort of the movement and the answer to the movement oftentimes,
Mm.
like, they have like kind of their own, like people will like join, like many people will be like imagists and modernists, and then many people will also be the answer to that postmodernists, and
Mm.
then but you'll have these voices or these sort of artists at the time who are both a modernist and a postmodernist, and it's because like, oftentimes, just as like maybe a society can be represented in a single man, in a hero, like we're talking about. Ezra Pound almost, was a kind of a hero, in
He
a sense.
was. He
Um,
was. He was
just
kind of the,
yeah.
just the by the amount of people that were revolving around him.
Hmm.
He was heroic in that.
Hmm.
Even
Hmm.
if he's not, he's definitely been stripped of those credentials by some would say academia or modern parlance or however you want to construe it. But
He's kind of unsavory in a
yeah,
way. Just as, I mean, like we said, even just like Kanye West, right? And there are many, people who are, um, who Pablo Picasso, who also, rub people the wrong way. Some of these figures, will, kind of with greatness, or like with a, great guys,
yeah.
like they're gonna do a lot of good and a lot of bad sometimes, maybe sometimes even more bad. Yeah, yeah.
Even
That's
Edgar
it.
Allan Poe was had some enemies.
Hmm. Hmm. Or even Napoleon, like you were talking about before. I mean, some of these guys, like, Napoleon is like, he's no slouch, obviously, like the
No.
guy's Napoleon, but then at the same time, you're like, yeah, I mean, he's not a great guy, or not a good guy, maybe,
Yeah,
you know.
maybe. I mean, I don't know.
Great, yeah, yeah, great. I think that's probably indisputable, but good,
He's definitely one of
depends.
these. He's one of these people that walked that line. He had the optimism to realize like he could change the world, but the cynicism to see that the world needed changing, and even some could say the cynicism to think that hey, we're the French and we're a cut above the rest. That is cynical. Um, Fascism is cynical of neighboring countries. Fascism is cynical of regular people. Fascism is sort of it's you can't really exalt the modern man, and the individual cannot be exalted in fascism. Fascism, the individual must be subverted for the state.
Right, yeah. Well, it's a cynicism in that it's sort of, uh, the word that is eluding me, but, you're cynical about sort of the goodness in the individual and the common man.
Mm-hmm.
You've kind of, yeah, grown to distrustful of that, of the
Right.
judgment of the common man. And I mean, that's, we saw that with Plato, um, and after the death of Socrates.
Mm.
how people could be swayed so easily swayed against Socrates to uh, you know condemn him to death.
And it's interesting how the pharaoh, the king at the top of that pyramid, is sort of almost like the individual. Like you kill the king, you almost also killed the individual.
Right.
But as George Washington taught us, when George Washington sort of denied the king,
Hmm.
it exalted the it exalted the individual. There are
It
sort of
did.
Christian
Hmm. It didn't.
overtones in that.
Yeah. And in some ways, it also exalted the state in a way. It kind of exalted the collective. To say like, hey,
Mm,
any one of us could do it.
right.
We're all capable here. You know, and
That's
so
that's
it's
crazy. That's
right.
that's that's that we are in the
Yeah.
Christian world. We are in the Christian
Right.
world. If you really pull
Yeah.
back our ideas, you will see that.
Hmm. Yeah.
Damn,
Yeah.
like we are in the
Absolutely. Right.
Christian
Yeah.
world. Like
Yeah. Right.
like
Yeah.
it's hard
And
to sort of get away from that.
right. Yeah. And that's why, like, today we package it a little bit more nice and neat. So we're like, oh yeah, these are Christian ideas, and this is Christian. But then it's like, I mean, it's the further back you go, it's really tough to try and parse some of our ideas,
It
from Christian
is.
to to non-Christian, whatever that is, because even our non-Christian ideas are, you know,
Even if you
gonna,
get away
you
from
know,
Christianity, we still believe in the higher forms, especially in America.
yeah, or like anything that we're like, our ways in which we break into new forms are all things that we didn't do when, as Christians. So like that,
Mm,
like that's how we find freedom is doing not Christianity. Like through that is freedom. And then
mm.
so through that alone, our very ideas of freedom are shaped by Christianity,
Well, I
and
mean,
dependent upon it.
when you begin to deny these meta narratives, you arrive at the idea that history then is just a narrative. If you're cynical enough to say there is no grand narrative,
Hmm.
then history becomes someone's narrative. And if history is someone's narrative, it may as well be mine, and you are on the wrong side of it, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Then we try to we now we have the power to shape our historical narrative, and to
Right.
define history into, you know, right.
To
Yeah, it's
break history into these sort of power dynamics,
yeah.
when at one time people thought that history was just great men.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is kind of where we're, a part of this great conversation. Now we're coming back to where, like it's like, wanting to break with forms, create new forms, and now it's like now we're gonna choose forms.
Mm.
We we're not gonna just break them. Now we're gonna break them and then remold them in a particular way, for a particular purpose.
Yeah, as like Terrence Howard and his sonnet, singing a sonnet to his assassin,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
which was fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, hey, this is kind of the exciting thing. I mean, and this conversation is going to continue
It
between us because
is.
can you remind me who do we have next week? Is it
Let me.
Keats next week or
It
or
may
it
be.
it might be Keats or is it Louis Gluck?
It might be. Let me see. Yeah, next week we do have Gluck followed by Keats.
Gluck is going to be exciting.
Okay, yeah. Lewis Gluck, Louise Gluck,
Louis,
right?
yeah,
Louise Gluck, pardon me, followed by
John
Keats,
Keats.
John Keats. So
Which is yeah, so we're gonna go even further into more into postmodernism, and then we're gonna go back to really forms, with John
yeah,
Keats. So
we are
uh,
the
that's
old
yeah,
school European
uh-huh,
song forms.
right, yeah,
So
yeah,
we're bouncing around. This is great. It's a
yeah,
good time, man. And the
hmm,
Ezra Pound, I mean, this guy he took us. This is a character that'll force you to ask questions
right,
about what you do, about the
yeah,
poetry you're writing,
yeah.
the society you're in.
The thing is, I mean, Ezra Pound was so ahead of his time. People they didn't know why, but he was having them call him Ezra hashtag. and I mean, this guy was. I mean, talk about a a contemporary mind.
Yeah, talk about it.
Yeah, Ezra hashtag. No, and they didn't understand it. They didn't get why. Yeah,
Man, Ezra Pound,
yeah,
man, shout out to him, and we got some
yeah.
more coming for you guys. And
Right. Yeah.
hey, get
So
down in the comments and
right. Yeah. Comment, like, subscribe. All that.
right.
Right. Elbow drop on that like button.
Headbutt that like button.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, thanks for listening. This has been episode 10 here. We're gonna be back next week live in full effect, and yeah.
Episode 10.
Right. Yeah.
But this has been Verse Taken signing off. We'll
Yep.
see you guys later.
All right.
All right. Hey, man. That was what's up. I felt like that was a good episode.
Yeah, I was feeling that too.
Maybe we don't need to get so high.
Right. Yeah, I think there's like a level to it. I think last week I was a little too